captured 5 Chinese girls in town, brutally whipped. Cowboy squad ride in, but justice came at a price. The wind that swept across the valley that morning carried more than dust. It carried whispers of fear, of memory, of reckoning. In the town of Devil's Breath, the sky hung low, swollen with storm clouds that threatened to burst. Wooden signs creaked. Doors slammed shut against the gusts. The streets, usually bustling with miners, gamblers, and hollow-eyed drifters, had grown quiet save for the rhythmic tolling of the town's iron bell. It echoed like a funeral hymn. A wooden platform had been hastily erected in the town square, splinters jutting out like knives. 5 girls stood atop it, shackled and barefoot, their dresses torn, soiled, and hanging. Off thin frames clung to skin, etched with bruises and fresh lashes. They were Chinese brought in months ago as labor, and quickly forgotten, except when the town needed something to blame. Now they were on display, not as humans, but as warnings. The crowd pressed forward, a tide of faces, marked by dirt and desperation. Whispers turned to murmurs. Murmurs to chants. Some cheered, some spat. Most just watched, hollow and hungry. Men clutched their children closer, not out of protection, but indoctrination. A new lesson was about to be taught in Devil's Breath. One written in blood. A man stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. His boots were polished spurs, gleaming. Judge Silas Malik, tall, silver-haired, with eyes that held no light. He raised one gloved hand, and silence followed. He cleared his throat. These girls, he said, voice cutting through the wind, were caught stealing from the mining co-op gold dust property of free men. He paused, letting the lie settle. No one had seen them steal anything, but no one would question Malik. Not here. He turned toward the platform. Punishment will be swift and public. Ruck Barrow emerged from the crowd like a storm in flesh. Bulky, broad-shouldered eyes bloodshot with bourbon and spite. The whip hung from his side like a serpent eager to strike. He climbed the platform, slowly drawing out the moment. Each step was a threat. Each creak of the boards beneath his boots echoed like a war drum. First girl, barely 16, trembled as he approached. Her name would never be spoken. The town had no use for it. Ready? When you are judge. Ruck sneered, rolling his neck, but there on the ridge just outside town, a lone figure watched from his horse. Eli Kearns sat still in the saddle, eyes shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His face was sun-weathered, jaw-dusted with gray stubble. His coat, long and brown, was frayed at the edges, marked by years on the trail. His horse, a black Mustang named Whiskey, shifted nervously beneath him. Eli squinted at the scene, unfolding the distant image of the girl, arms bound, face turned toward the heavens. Hit something deep in his chest. His hand slipped into his coat pocket. Fingers closed around a small silver locket. He opened it. Inside, a faded photo. A woman, serene and strong, with almond-shaped eyes, and a child, no older than 5, nestled at her side. Mei Lee, his wife and daughter, gone, burned in a fire set by the same kind of mob that now gathered in Devil's Breath. Their only crime, loving a white man. Eli snapped the locket shut. He could turn away. He'd done it before. He was no savior, no hero. Just a man chasing ghosts for gold, riding from one town to the next, collecting bounties and drinking memories into silence. But this was different. The whip cracked. The girl screamed, and Eli's hand fell to his revolver. He didn't draw, not yet. He needed to know more, see how deep the rot went. Devil's Breath was like a boil waiting to be lanced, but one wrong move would cost lives. Not just his in the square. The second girl had fainted after 2 lashes. Ruck cursed and dragged her to her feet. The crowd laughed. Somewhere a child clapped. Near the saloon, a group of Union War veterans sipped rot-gut whiskey, their uniforms' faded buttons mismatched. They watched without comment. This was normal. Here, this was justice. Behind them, a Chinese merchant stood frozen, gripping the edge of his cart. He dared not move. The wrong glance could brand him next. Back on the ridge, Eli noticed something else. Movement near the canyon trail. Dust clouds. Horses 6 Riders emerged, dark figures against the dying sun. One wore a duster as black as midnight, face covered by a cloth. They moved like they belonged nowhere, and feared nothing. Eli's eyes narrowed. These weren't townfolk, and they weren't lawmen. Either. Whiskey snorted, sensing the tension. Eli dismounted, slowly scanning the trail behind him. No signs of ambush. Yet down below, the fourth girl was being whipped. Her knees buckled with each strike. Her scream was hoarse, now more breath than voice. Ruck paused to catch his breath, sweat pouring down his face. Judge Malik checked his pocket watch, bored. Finish it. The final girl, the youngest, met Ruck's gaze with something close to defiance. She didn't cry. Not yet. Eli could see her from the ridge, eyes black as night, fists clenched. Little tiger, Ruck muttered, stepping toward her. And that was when Eli moved. He stepped off the ridge, walking slow. Measured each footfall, deliberate. The crowd noticed him only when he was halfway to the square. A ripple of confusion spread. The sheriff, lounging by the general store, stood and rested a hand on his holster. Eli didn't stop walking. He reached the edge of the crowd and pulled back his coat, revealing the revolver at his side. And a tin star, worn, scratched, not local. Name's Kearns, he said, voice gravel rough. Got a warrant for 1 Ruck Barrow, wanted in El Paso, 5 counts of aggravated assault, 1 attempted rape. Ruck froze. That's a lie. Eli raised an eyebrow. Funny thing you say that a lot. Judge Malik stepped forward. This is my town, my laws. Eli turned to him. Then you're harboring a fugitive, interfering with federal business. He held up a folded parchment, the seal of the U.S. Marshal. Glinted in the dying light. Malik hesitated, lips pressed tight. These girls stole. They don't even speak English. Eli cut in. And even if they did, theft's not a hanging offense, or a public whipping one. The sheriff looked between them. He didn't draw. Not yet, but his hand twitched. The town held its breath. Eli stepped up onto the platform. He knelt beside the youngest girl, gently lifting her chin. Her lip bled. Her eyes met his, and in that instant, something passed between them. Not words. Recognition. He reached into his coat, pulled a handkerchief, and handed it to her. She stared at it, then him. Slowly she took it. Let them go, Eli said, rising to his feet. Malik shook his head. You've no authority here, bounty hunter. No. Eli agreed. But that storm rolling in doesn't care much for papers, and neither do the men coming down the trail. Malik turned just as the riders entered the town square. 6 of them, faces hidden. The one in black dismounted first. He moved with a kind of silence that felt unnatural. The others spread out hands near their weapons. The crowd backed away, sensing something off. Even the sheriff looked uncertain. Ruck grabbed the whip, holding it like a shield. Who the hell are they? Eli didn't answer. He didn't know. The man in black stepped forward, raised a hand, and pointed straight at Judge Malik. Malik scoffed. I don't answer to outlaws. Then the man removed his mask, gasps half. His face was scarred, burned beyond recognition. But the eyes were sharp and native, running eloquence. A scout for the Union Army, presumed dead after the massacre at Ash Creek. Word was he'd vanished into the mountains. Become legend. He didn't speak. Couldn't. They'd cut out his tongue during captivity, but his silence carried weight. He pointed again, this time at the girls. The message was clear. Malik stepped back. The sheriff didn't move, and then it happened. Ruck swung the whip, reckless, desperate. Eli drew and fired. Bullet struck Ruck's hand, spinning the whip into the dirt. He screamed, clutching his wrist, running. Elk stepped forward and placed a blade at Ruck's throat. The crowd began to disperse. Judge Malik stood, a lone rage boiling beneath his polished exterior. You'll regret this, Kearns. Maybe, Eli said, holstering his weapon. But I've regretted worse. The riders moved swiftly. They cut the girls loose, wrapped them in blankets. One cried softly. Another collapsed into the arms of a rider. The youngest looked back at Eli and stepped forward and touched his hand. Reef wordless. The storm broke and rain fell in sheets. Eli looked up, eyes closed for a moment. Running Elk nodded once. Eli returned the gesture. They mounted their horses. The girls placed gently in front of the riders. As they rode out of town, Judge Malik stared after them, hatred burning. Eli remained behind, eyes on the trail. The storm had come, but it wasn't finished. Rain poured like judgment over the hills, and the trail turned to sludge beneath the hooves of weary horses. The riders moved fast, but not reckless. Their burden was too precious. Eli rode near the rear, his eyes flicking between the terrain and the fall. Girls huddled in front of the cowboys ahead. One of them coughed, a wet hacking sound that didn't bode well in this cold. They didn't stop. Couldn't. The farther they got from Devil's Breath, the more dangerous the land became. They had escaped. A gallows, yes, but survival, Eli knew, wasn't just about outrunning the noose. It was about fighting the elements' hunger and the violence that lay in wait, far from any law. He also knew Malik wouldn't let this go unanswered. The judge would dispatch hunters, mercenaries, and whatever devils he could muster to retrieve his authority and his property. The group finally broke through the trees and descended into a ravine. Eli recognized Hollow's Bend. It was narrow, concealed, and treacherous. To outsiders, once years ago, Eli had tracked an outlaw through this same pass. Back then, the ravine had swallowed men whole. Now it would have to hide. The broken running Elk gave a sharp hand gesture, and the riders split silently, securing the area. Before dismounting, despite his silence, he commanded with an elegance born of violence and instinct. Eli respected that words were often wasted on fools. Action was truth. Fire was lit under a rocky overhang. The youngest girl sat close to it, eyes wide, cheeks fevered. Eli knelt beside her, removing his coat and wrapping it around her shoulders. She flinched at first, but didn't pull away. He noticed the way her fingers trembled, not from cold alone. Trauma lived in the marrow. He offered her a piece of jerky. She hesitated, then took it. One of the older girls, tall with fierce cheekbones and a protective posture, stepped in front of the others. She stared Eli down, arms crossed. Her face was unreadable, but her stance spoke. We owe you nothing. Eli didn't argue. He didn't expect gratitude. He just nodded once and walked away, running. Elk stood at the edge of the firelight, sharpening a blade with quiet focus. His presence was spectral. He didn't speak, but somehow he communicated more than words ever could. He moved like a man, with purpose, deliberate and alert. Eli approached slowly. You always show up when the sky's about to split, he said. Running Elk paused, then handed Eli a strip of dried root. Fever bark, natural remedy. She's burning up, Eli muttered, glancing toward the fire. Warrior nodded. You still don't talk, huh? Blank look. Didn't think so. He took the root, crushed it, and added it to a kettle of snow melt water. The girl sipped it reluctantly. Her eyes fluttered shut. The silence of the hollow grew thick. No one asked what came next. They were fugitives, now united by necessity, but not yet by trust. Later, as the fire dwindled and the cold deepened, Eli found himself staring into the flames. Images of Lee returned. Unbidden, his daughter's laugh, her tiny hands grabbing at the stars. The way she'd called him Baba before the flames devoured everything. He clenched his jaw. He wasn't here to relive the past, but the lines kept blurring. He glanced over. The youngest girl, curled beneath his coat, looked too much like hair. A branch cracked in the distance. Eli was on his feet before he realized it, gun drawn, finger brushing the trigger. Running Elk moved too, blending with the shadows like a ghost. One of the other riders signaled, 2 fingers up, 1 down. Danger approaching fast. They doused the fire. Shadows reclaimed the hollow. Then came voices, male, rough, swearing. They came through here. One snarled, I smell horse shit and campfire. Mercenaries. Malik had sent his hounds. Eli crouched low beside Running Elk. From behind a rock outcropping, he spotted 5 men picking their way into the ravine. One of them wore a red scarf. Ruck's cousin, if memory served. The family resemblance was all fury and Eli counted the footsteps, watched their formations. They weren't cautious. Overconfident running elk tapped Eli's shoulder and made a motion circle close strike. Eli nodded, moved left flanking through wet brush and low trees. His boots made no sound. He remembered the way the girl had looked at him back in town, like she'd wanted him to be someone he wasn't Tony. Maybe he could be. He crept behind the last of the bounty hunters, then struck fast arm around the throat gun. Pressed into ribs, the man gurgled silenced a whistle. Then chaos running elk dropped from above like a shadow in human form, blade flashing. Another man went down screaming, gunfire erupted. Sparks flew. Eli dropped one, then another, blood soaked into the mud. The last two tried to retreat, slipping on wet stones. One made it 10 steps before a knife whistled through the air and buried itself in his spine. Silence returned. The mercenaries lay dead or dying. Eli, breathed hard. Running elk stood tall. Untouched. You haven't lost your edge, Eli muttered. The warrior didn't respond. He simply moved to the youngest girl, crouched beside her, checking her pulse. Alive, but one of the older girls hadn't escaped unscathed. She'd been hit, arm torn by a ricochet. Blood oozed. Eli ripped cloth from his own shirt and tied it tight. You're all right, he murmured, more to himself than her. You're all right. She looked at him, pain in her eyes, but nodded once. Acceptance, maybe the first step toward trust. Hollow stank of gunpowder and copper. They couldn't stay. As dawn began to crawl across the sky, Eli stood watch while the group packed. They'd need to move deeper into the hills toward Pine Needle Pass. Risky, but safe from townsfolk. He watched the girls prepare, silently moving as if weightless from exhaustion. Still they endured, and he saw it now, not just fear but strength, especially in the tall one. She led without speaking, guarded them fiercely. A mother figure, maybe, or just the one who refused to let them break. As they moved on, Eli walked beside her. What's your name? He asked softly. She hesitated. Then with careful English she said. Eli nodded. You speak well, not much learned from him. She gestured vaguely toward running elk. That surprised him. He taught you? Eli asked. No, she replied. He saved us. But he teaches without talking. Eli gave a dry smile. Yeah, he does that. An hour later they reached a ledge overlooking a frozen creek. The path forward was narrow. One misstep would be fatal. Eli dismounted and walked ahead on foot, testing the rocks. Behind him the girls followed, single file expressions carved from ice, and resolve. Halfway across the sky darkened again. Snow began to fall, thick, relentless. They reached a small plateau where an old trapper's shack stood, leaning but intact shelter inside. The roof leaked and mice fled at their arrival, but it was enough. They built a fire again. This time no smoke running. Elk had taught them how to burn without drawing eyes. Girls huddled, exhausted. Anley cleaned the wound of the injured girl. The youngest finally smiled. A fleeting moment. Eli stepped out into the snow. He needed airspace to think. Running elk joined him. Why help them? Eli asked suddenly. You could have ridden on. The warrior stared at the sky. They're not your tribe, not even your people. Still silence. Then running elk pulled a medallion from his belt, a Chinese symbol etched into iron. Eli recognized it. May had worn one just like it, gifted to her by an elder years ago. Running elk didn't explain. He didn't have to. Eli looked away, throat tightening. You knew. Hear a nod. Then you know why I can't leave them behind. Running elk placed the medallion in Eli's hand, a gesture of faith it shared. History. Eli closed his fist around it. We keep moving at first light. Back inside, Anley watched them through the cracked window. She didn't trust Eli yet, not fully, but she saw the way he looked at them, not with ownership, not with pity, with purpose. That night, as snow fell thick and silent, Eli sat beside the fire, holding the medallion and locket together in one hand. He didn't sleep. He couldn't afford to. Morning would bring another choice: stay and risk capture, or ride into the unknown with A handful of strangers who'd become something. Close to sacred Eli didn't know yet what redemption looked like. But he was starting to believe it might be real, even here, even in the hollow. The sun didn't rise so much as bleed across the sky that morning, casting the mountain ridge in a halo of crimson. The cold bit hard, numbing fingers and faces, but none of them complained. They'd survived another night, for now that was enough. Eli stood at the edge of the lookout, scanning the lower trails with the eyes of a man who expected the worst, and was seldom disappointed. Behind him the shack had grown quieter. The girls still slept huddled close under layers of saddle blankets, and Lai stirred first, her expression calm, but eyes sharp, always watching. She was the hinge between fear and defiance. She bore the weight of their survival, without ever admitting it. The youngest girl lay curled beside her, cheeks flush with color again. No longer fevered, the healing root had done its work. Eli glanced toward the tree line. Running Elk was already out there, silent, a shadow moving like a wraith along the edges of visibility. Always patrolling, never speaking, his presence, though wordless, was steel in their spines. Even the horses seemed to stand straighter when he passed. They couldn't stay much longer. Supplies were nearly gone, and the snow was thinning enough to leave tracks. Eli knew Malik wouldn't accept humiliation in silence. The man's pride was too grotesque, too entwined with his power. So he would send killers, and this time they wouldn't be sloppy mercenaries. They'd be professionals. Eli returned to the shack, knelt by the fire, and stirred the embers. The light flickered against his face, dancing over old scars. Anli approached quietly and crouched beside him. "How far to safe place?" she asked, voice low. 2 days, he said. "If we cut through Ridgeback." Her eyes narrowed. "Ridgeback not safe?" "No." He agreed. "It's not," she nodded. That was enough. No argument, no fear, just the truth shared and accepted. Rest of the day was spent preparing horses, were fed packs, rewrapped weapons, cleaned and checked. Eli gave the girls what little ammo. He had left 1 bullet each. A last resort, better a choice than capture. He hated what that meant, hated more that it was necessary. By nightfall, the sky was bruised and the air still. Too still. Eli's gut twisted. He stood outside again, senses flaring. Then he heard it, a sound carried by wind, the sharp snap of a branch, not broken by deer or wolf. A booth turned fast, signaling toward the trees running. Elk emerged from the dark eyes, urgent, 2 fingers. Many riders approaching fast. They were out of time. Eli ran back into the shack. "Wake them," he barked. "Now." Chaos erupted, blankets thrown aside. Boots pulled on weapons, grabbed, and Lai was already ushering the girls toward the rear exit. Eli blocked the front with a tipped-over table. No illusions of defense, just delay outside. Horses thundered the ridge, echoed with voices, shouts, commands. The enemy had found them running. Elk returned, gesturing sharply. There was a path behind the shack, a drop down a narrow ravine that led to a lower trail. Dangerous, but passable. The girls could escape that way. Eli looked at them, at the fear in their faces, at the lives still barely begun. "I'll buy time," he said, and Lee grabbed his arm. "No, you have to lead them. You lead." He shook his head. "They trust you." Her grip tightened. "We trust you." He didn't answer. Couldn't. He turned and faced the front again. Riding Elk placed a hand on his shoulder. It wasn't approval. It was understanding. They would fight together, die if needed. A moment passed, long and loaded. Then the first bullet struck the wall, splinters exploded. The girls screamed. Eli shoved open the front door and fired, dropping the nearest rider with a single shot. Running Elk vanished into the trees, becoming smoke and bone striking from shadows. Gunfire lit the ridge like lightning. Muzzle flashes flared, then vanished. Eli moved between trees and boulders. Every step measured, every shot counted. He dropped another man, then another, but there were too many. He was hit. The shoulder burned like fire. He gritted his teeth, reloaded, kept going. Running Elk took down two with blades alone, never making a sound. One attacker turned just in time to see the flash of steel before crumpling into the snow, but they were. Being surrounded, Eli ducked behind a log breath ragged. His revolver was nearly empty, and he heard the screaming eye, stood and ran, ignoring the pain heart pounding louder than gunfire. He reached the ravine edge and saw her halfway down, cornered by a rider who'd circled ahead. The man had her by the hair, dragging her upward, raised his revolver. One shot, one chance. He fired the rider, dropped, blood spraying across the snow, and Eli scrambled away, panting. She didn't look back. Eli turned and caught the butt of a rifle across the jaw. He fell. Darkness surged. He awoke to snow in his mouth, blood on his tongue, and a boot on his chest above him. Judge Malik stood, flanked by two of his personal guards, dressed in black wool, rifles slung casually across his shoulder. He looked less like a lawman and more like an undertaker. "You always had a messiah complex, Kearns," Malik said. "You just never figured out you ain't Jesus." Eli coughed, spat blood. "You always were a sanctimonious bastard, Malik. Glad to see that hasn't changed." Malik smiled coldly. "The girls?" Eli grinned through broken teeth. "Gone." Malik's smile faded. "That won't save you." "Didn't plan on being saved." Malik raised his rifle. "Ben, let's end this." A sound split the trees, a scream, then another. Gunshots. Malik turned, running. Elk tore into the clearing like a storm, incarnate blade in one hand, revolver in the other. He moved like fury, given flesh. One of the guards raised his weapon too slow. Elk buried the knife in his throat. The second guard fired wildly, missing everything. Elk shot him through the eye. Malik staggered back, raising his rifle. Eli surged upward, grabbed the fallen revolver, and fired from the ground. Malik screamed and dropped to one knee, hit in the leg. Eli stood over him. "Justice," he said, voice low. Malik sneered. "This is murder." Eli looked him in the eye. "No, this is a reckoning." He pulled the trigger. Malik's body slumped. Snow continued to fall, covering the blood. Eli dropped the gun. His hands shook, not from pain, from release. Running. Elk stood beside him, breath heavy. Neither spoke. They turned and followed the ravine down, finding the others huddled near a fallen pine. Anli rose, eyes wide. "You came back." Eli nodded. "We all did." No words were needed after that. They continued through the night, finally reaching the outer trails by dawn. Smoke from a Chinese rail camp drifted in the distance. Safety, maybe, or at least rest. The girls were received like survivors of a war. The workers there didn't ask questions. They gave food, warmth, and silence. Later, as Eli prepared to leave, Anli approached. "You saved us." Eli shook his head. "No, you saved each other. I just helped." Offered him a folded paper, a sketch drawn in charcoal. It showed him on horseback, coat flapping in wind, the 5 girls behind him. He looked at it for a long time. "You have talent," he said. She smiled and turned away. Running. Elk waited by the trees. Horse saddled, Eli joined him. "You going your own way?" Eli asked. The warrior nodded. "I figured." They clasped forearms. A bond forged not in words, but in fire and blood. Eli rode out slowly, the wind tugging at his coat, in his pocket the sketch in his heart, something heavier and lighter at the same time. Justice had come, but it had cost everything. Still, for the first time in years, he didn't feel hollow. He felt alive.